What's up, everybody? Welcome to the latest episode of Husbandry, a place where we just explain and talk about the vividness and the color of marriage because it's been an institution that's explained so black and white to us. I know I have a special guest here. Let me introduce him before I start talking to him. I know him as Reverend Perrone, but tonight he's going to be Ken Perrone, right? Brother Ken is here with us. And Ken, I remember last time we were talking, we, talked about how marriage can be taught so checkbox, just black and white. And then you get in this thing and you're like, oh, wait a minute. Like there's a lot more than the standard things that I need to do. This is a lot more nuanced. It's a lot more complex than when I thought. So, that's why we have this podcast to teach, to help people see that, and people who are already seeing that and not getting the information are able to get it from here. I actually got a phone call the other day. Somebody was like, yo, keep doing this. We need it. So it's going to be a lot of people listening to you. Ken, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing well, bro. I'm doing well. How you doing tonight?
Man, I am doing good. As you can see, I'm on 10. I'm so excited for this interview. So you can see my energy is just going off the charts. It's just going off the charts. Sir. All right. So Ken, well, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Husbandry. And I always lead with these first two questions. The first question is, how long have you been married?
We just celebrated our 40th anniversary, November 20th.
40 years of marriage. That's 4 decades of marriage.
Yeah.
Am I counting that right?
That's a long time. That's a long time. Yes, sir.
That is a long time. So before we jump into the story of 40 years, if you had to sum your 40-year marriage up in one sentence, what would that sentence be?
I've had the pleasure on being on a roller coaster ride for a lifetime.
Wow.
And what I mean by that is, yes, roller coasters are thrill rides. Yes, they're up and down. They shake you up. And that's what we've had. We've been up and down. We've been around the bend and, shook us up and, and now we're probably on that, as we're coming into the station part of it, So it's been a roller coaster.
So let's jump into that a little more, because some people watching may really love roller coasters and see the thrill and the adventure and the rush, and they may really understand it from that perspective. But other people may be watching and say roller coasters scare the heck out of me. Whenever I get on them, I think it's going to be the end. It's going to be over. Let's talk about some of those ups and downs you've gone through. Tell us about the biggest thrill you've had on the roller coaster ride, and then talk to us about the deepest plunge where you may have been wondering, whoa, is this ride going to end badly, if there was a plunge like that?
Okay. Let me just say before I start, you were breaking up and stuff, so I didn't get all of it. I kind of got the last bit of the question, so I don't know if that's affecting the recording as well. When you look,
no, you'll be good. Do you need me to ask it again?
Okay. Yes, please.
Okay.
Yes.
So you described it as a roller coaster ride. Mm-hmm. And some people who see roller coaster rides may say, man, I really love roller coaster rides. They have a great thrill. They're adventurous. I love taking the risk. And then others who see a roller coaster ride may say, man, roller coaster rides scare me to death. I would never get on one. So tell us about the greatest thrill that you've had on your roller coaster ride and the deepest plunge.
Let me just say one thing before I get to that, because you said something about roller coaster rides scare you to death. And I think that's very poignant, because marriage should, and I don't say that like, from a point of being so afraid that a person doesn't want to get married. But if you think about the marriage vow, it says that you should not enter into this lightly. And when you say that that fear, I'm going to say, is not a fear of like you go to a horror movie and you're scared. It's a fear of, I think, can I do this? Am I going to be good at it? Are we going to make it? So yes, there should be some fear as you approach it. Now, I'll have to say, we've probably, at this point, probably had 2 deep plunges. Early on, we probably had a deep plunge. Wasn't walking with the Lord, wasn't walking in my role, wasn't doing what I needed to do as a husband. And, I think, that was probably a very deep plunge for us. And the blessing is that God still had his hand on us, and we were able to come out of that plunge and start to go back up again. So we went back up and did a bunch of things, kids, and multiple years, and now we're probably in a little bit of a plunge, mainly because of health issues, and the complications from that. So those 2 times, early on within the first 2 to 3 years, we kind of probably had a deep plunge. And then now we're probably in a deep plunge.
So if you can give me a little bit, let's talk about the first one. If you can think back that far, what took you into the plunge? You talked about you being a husband and different aspects of leadership. What took you in the plunge, and what brought you out of the plunge?
Well, I got some wise advice, I'll say, from my best friend's mother right after we got married. I didn't understand the advice. I didn't see it. We had just gotten married in November. He had a birthday in January. We were home for winter break. We went to his birthday, and his mom grabbed my buddy and I and pulled us to the side and said to him, or to us, "You can't hang out together anymore." And we both kind of looked at each like, "Are you crazy? I mean, we're boys, he was the brother I never had. How am I not going to hang out with him, And she just said, "You cannot hang out with him." I did not. She didn't expound. I didn't grasp it. And talking to him some years later, he didn't either until we both got married. And little did I know she was giving me Bible, but I wasn't walking in that. So I didn't get it. I'm just thinking like, okay, yeah, So fast forward, I moved to Philadelphia, and I meet another friend, and we became boys. And next thing you know, he was single, and I was doing more things that he was doing. And because I was doing that and not acting as a married man, and not that I was out, like, let's say, chasing women or anything like that, but I was just not spending the time or putting in the time that I needed to put in for my wife and my marriage. So I had the mindset more of a single man in a married body. So, that was probably what took us into that plunge, is me not walking as a married
man. Ken, you wouldn't believe it, how many married men I talk to. And when I tell them about how I don't befriend in a hangout all the time kind of way single men, or men who are not married, or married men who act like they're single, they throw a fit. What do you mean? Why is this? Yeah. And it's simply this. It's the Proverbs for me. Can a man scoop hot coal in his lap and not get burned? Right? If I go doing things with single men like I'm single, then something is going to happen, or could happen, where I get my roles mixed up. Now I'm a married man. I can't do all of that. So you put boundaries around that. You begin to act more like a married man in a married man's body, and not a married man in a single man's body? What made you wisen up? What drove that point home for you to say, oh, wow, she was right. I can't do this anymore, because when I do this, I am sacrificing or jeopardizing or putting this in trouble. What made you come to your senses?
Well, when we got to that crisis where, we were looking at each other and we were like, we were talking almost the divorce word, the D word.
Mm-hmm.
And I was blessed enough to have, actually, it was my boss, who, I kind of watched him. And one of the things that Sheree and I have always talked about, we know that we didn't do everything right before marriage and obviously during marriage, but we knew God had put us together. We knew God had his hand on us. So we, at that time, determined that we were going to fight for the marriage. And not that I, gave up my friend. We were still friends because he's a very dear friend of both of us. But it was just, I was just doing a lot of the things that he was doing. And I stopped doing those things, started doing more of the things that I needed to do as a husband. And let me just say one other thing. And to your point about not befriending, single friends, single men and all that. And I'm not saying that, that is, what we have to do. I think we can have some single friends, but I think we also have to recognize that, I can't do, I need to have more married friends than I do single friends. Yeah, I might go do something with you once in a while. We might go over here and do this, but the majority of my stuff is, if it's not with my wife, then it's going to be with other like-minded couples or men.
That's right. That's right. I get you. But let me tell you how I agree totally 100% with you. And just to drive that point home, if a single man was calling my phone too many times asking me to come hang out, I think some questions will start being asked, right?
Yes.
Why is he always calling you? Are you his wingman? No wingman is going on over here. No, there is not. I am not his wingman. So let's keep going. So you're giving us the beginning of the beginning of it. Tell us a little bit about your love story. Walk us through, right? Take some leaps, but walk us through maybe even by the decade, your love story. How did it start? How did it progress, right? How did you grow? Give us a little summary of that.
Well, if I had to tell you how we initially got together, there would always be, particularly if Sheree were here, there would be a difference of opinion, let's say.
Okay.
But we did meet in college. We had a sort of I don't want to say auspicious, but it wasn't your normal, I see her, she sees me, and, boom, we, connect right away. But once we did actually connect, it was very quick. In terms of us starting to, we started dating and I knew within 6 weeks to 2 months that she could be, she was marriage material. She could be my wife. I mean, we were both younger. I mean, we were sophomore and freshman in college, and, I knew I wasn't looking to get married right then and there, but if, down the line, we just really, connected. I think, one of the things, the amount of respect, if you will, and again, I go back to, again, we weren't walking in the Lord at that time, but there were things that we were doing or things that were said that had biblical principles behind it. We just didn't know it or understand it.
Right.
The way Sheree might refer to me, She referred to me one time as Lord, you know, and I'm thinking, okay, well, where did that come from? I mean, we don't talk in those terms,
You think she
but
around there reciting Shakespeare or something, huh?
right, but if you look at it, she was referring to me in my position, you know, as Lord of, and so as I think about those things, um, early on, I remember she had a checking account with her mother, and I would get money from my mom and dad, or when I worked little things, I'd get money, and I didn't have a checking account. I would give it to her. I said, "Here, go put it in an account." Now
Mm.
she could have, took that money and done anything. I had no way of getting it, but that was the level of trust that I had in her, that she wasn't going to take my money and run off or anything, So I often think about, we had nothing when we got together. So it wasn't like I was chasing something material and she
Hmm.
wasn't chasing anything material from me, So it was a genuine love, respect, interest in one another. I've always been, and this might sound corny, but I've always been a one woman man. I've always felt
Mm.
like if I'm going to be in a relationship, what I'm putting into this relationship, I want to be able to get out. I want to be able to withdraw, that same energy or interest or love that I'm putting in. And I got that from Cherie, and so
Yeah.
that's kind of how we.
So let's talk about this. I don't know what to call it. Let's talk about this sixth sense that some men have when they're getting ready to get married. That they can meet a woman and they can know within a short amount of time that this woman is wife material. And not only is she wife material, but she is my wife material. So let's talk about what did you see in your wife that says she's wife material? What kind of characteristics did you see? And what would you have young men nowadays look out for to separate wife material from whatever other kinds of material are out there?
That's a good question, Darren. I think the first and foremost thing I really felt from Cherie is her caring and nurturing spirit,
Hmm.
and how she cared for me and wanted the best for me. Um, and that wanting the best for me also meant the best for us, because we would have conversations on how we wanted to raise the kids or what we wanted to do, and basically how we wanted to build our foundation, and it wasn't about, well, you got to go do this, you got to, no, it's what are we going to do, so that I think was very, and at the time I probably did not, if you had to ask me way back then, 40 years, I probably wouldn't have been able to say anything. But as I look back, as I say, as you look back over your life, I can see, that caring, that loving, as I said. And it's funny because, in the beginning, all Cherie wanted me to do to ever do to her was just to speak to her. She didn't want to know me. She just wanted me to speak to her because she always thought I ignored her.
Right.
So it could have been, hey, after I said hello, I could have been, moved on and done something else. But all I can really go back to is just that was God's plan, God's design. God put it together. I can't explain it. I can't put my hand on it, but I know we can both look back and say it was nothing but the Lord. That's all I can really say.
Yeah. So look, there are some people who get into a similar situation like that, but instead of focusing on the person, they're focusing more on what they want out of the institution. I want to get married because I want to have kids. I want to get married because I want to have a family. I want to get married because I want the house, the backyard, the garage, all of that. I want to get married because of all of that stuff. And wanting to get married because of that is not necessarily wrong. But I've come to learn from talking to individuals and even my wife and I having conversation that when you get married because of that, once you get that, then what's left?
Yeah. Right.
Right. What's really there? And so tell us why you focus so much on the person you wanted to marry. And then you worried about the life you would have with them after. Like you said, you didn't marry each other's stuff. You didn't marry each other's futures. You married one another. Tell us why you took that route instead of looking at other things to push you down the aisle.
Again, that's an interesting question, and outside of, we became each other's best friend. As a matter of fact, I was in my college career. I was on the track team, in a fraternity, obviously going to school, and but having all of that, you would think, man, this guy's got all. No, it came down to just Sheree and I. All of the other stuff didn't really matter. As a matter of fact, my fraternities called me the hidden frat, because once we really kind of got together, you didn't see me, and when you did, you saw us. So
right.
it wasn't, it was just about being in her company, being in her presence, being with her. And I'm not going to say it's one of those things where she completed me and I completed her. No, we completed each other. And that, she always says that, I was the kind of guy that could never be alone. I couldn't be by myself. Mm-hmm. And having her, it just made me better. Maybe if you want to say she completed me, okay, maybe you can. But it was just having her in my life that made me like, yeah, this is what I want.
Yeah.
I don't want to be out here trying to do this by myself. I want to do it with her.
So you're on the first level of this roller coaster ride, but we all know that amusement parks don't stay open 24/7. We got to get off the ride and go to work, right? What I've come to learn in having these conversations with you gentlemen, in the first 5 episodes, there's over 125 years of marriage wisdom, right? That's how long a lot of you guys have been married. I won't say what that means about your age, but right, that's how long you've been married, right? And what I've realized, and even realizing in my own marriage, every marriage has a point where we get snapped out of it, and we're just like, oh, wait a minute, this is work. And if we don't work at this, then both of us are going to soon be having maybe some of the conversations that you had within the first 2 or 3 years. Is this something that we really want to be in? Talk about when your marriage became, it's good work, it's hard work, it's enjoyable work, it reaps benefit, but talk about when your marriage became work.
Probably when we had our first child. See, one of the things that Sheree and I were blessed by is we had a long courtship, let's say, about 4.5 years. Again, like I said, I met her freshman year, my sophomore year. So we dated all through that. We got to graduation. I was going into grad school. We got engaged. So we had another year and a half-ish. So we had about 5.5, 6 years of that courtship period. Once we got married, we had another 6 years before our first child. So that time we had to get to learn each other. We got to just be free and do things. And those 6 years before Deanna came, we did. We'd get in the car and just, go away for the weekend or whatever, Excuse me. We didn't have, I'll say, a care in the world, and that was kind of when we weren't really putting in, we were just doing, because we had the ability to do. Once Deanna came, now things changed. You talked about, as a single man being able to do all these things. Well, I was into some things that, took up a lot of time. I was into biathlons and triathlons. So I was training 5, 6, 7 hours a day on the weekends, and then all of a sudden here comes this baby, and now I got to assume different responsibilities. So I had to give up some of that in order to be there. And at the same time, coming back from that deep plunge, kind of getting back into that mode. Okay, wait a minute, I need to be walking as a husband. And so that was probably the jolt that I needed to be more intentional, to be more focused, to be more at home, not only for my child, but for my wife as well, trying to take stuff off of her, so that, she's not feeling like she's in this by herself. So that was kind of eye-opening. And then if you go through, and I remember, we'd go out on the weekends or we'd go out on Friday night, and all of our conversations would always be about the kids. And as they were in college and, they weren't at home as much, she said, we need something else to talk about. We need to have something, and I'm like, no, we'll be fine, But as soon as the kids were gone and we didn't have that, we were kind of just sitting there looking at each other like, what do we talk about?
Yeah.
And that's when, if I had to pinpoint another time work, that's when we had to start working again. Because for 18 years, we were just, you just do, because you got kids, you got all this stuff, you had to do that. Now they're gone. Now it's back to us again,
Yeah.
And that's when we had to start working again.
This is really good. So let's take we're getting ready to get deep. You got your swamp boots on. We're getting ready.
Let's go. Yes, sir.
You said something that is very key that I think a lot of us men need to hear. When it's time to go to work, you only can put in the real work if your hands are free. So you need to put some stuff down. But putting stuff down, you were doing biathlons, triathlons. There could be a grieving process to that. There could be a, man, this doesn't feel fair process to that. But when we don't put stuff down, we end up neglecting our wives and our families. Mm-hmm. So talk to the men out there who are having a hard time putting stuff down that they were either able to pick up in their single life, or they were able to pick it up in their marriage when they had more time and more freedom. Talk to them about why it's important to put it down, what they're risking by not putting it down, and how you worked through having to put it down, because that was something that you really enjoyed, that you really loved. What are some of the emotions you worked through in putting it down?
Again, and I don't want to come off phony or whatever, but a few things, and hopefully I can get through all of that. Just from a counseling perspective, when you put one thing down or you stop one thing, you have to replace it with something else. So for that, for me, that grieving, I don't think I really had to, I went through that or I had to go through that. And I only say that because, one, yes, did I stop training the way I wanted to, or did I stop competing? But what replaced that and gave me as much or more joy was raising my daughter and then my son. So I didn't like, oh man, I can't go do this anymore. I can't do that. I didn't have that. And the other thing was I was able to pick up other sports or train differently and just kind of still do it. So I didn't go through that, if you will, that grieving process. One of the things I would read books on, well, how do you train with kids, and they would, people, who had kids would give you tips. I remember one time we needed to go to the grocery store. I said, okay, we'll go to the grocery store. I got to get a run in. Can I run home from the grocery store? So she was like, okay. So we went to the grocery store, I did the groceries, and she just couldn't drive fast because I'm running behind her. So I ran, my 5 miles from the grocery store home. We got home, we put the groceries. So I had to start doing things like that. And then eventually I just like, you know what? I can't do it. Now my buddy, he was still doing it. I went and started doing other things. I had, whatever I was doing with the kids, or because of my job, I was able to do other things at my job while I was at job. So when I came home, I was home. And that's one of the blessings I feel that I've always enjoyed in my job is I didn't have the kind of job that I had to bring stuff home.
Yeah.
When I left work, I left work. And when I came home, I was daddy, husband, we went and did or whatever. So I didn't have to go through that. But, again, for those guys who are going through that, I would say, as I said before, if you give up one thing, you've got to replace it with something else. And 9 times out of 10, it's going to be your children or your spouse, And for me, that was part of the roller coaster ride, because now I'm having thrills with my kids, my wife, and the family. So that's when more of those thrills started to come, when I started doing what I was supposed to do as the married man and as the husband or as the father.
Yeah, I think there are 2 very great lessons you taught us in how you handled that. Number one, your perspective that you were receiving a greater gift in your daughter, in your family, in that, right? Like that you loved running, but you had a greater opportunity. What you were putting down and what you were picking up was better than what you were putting down. That's the first thing. Mm-hmm. The second is you didn't make them compete with one another. You made the lesser thing work around the schedule of the greater thing.
Yes.
And I think a lot of times what we do what we can do as men is when we don't want to put something down, we don't look for that creativity. Can I run home from the grocery store? I'm like, that's just a phenomenal idea, right? We don't look for that compromise. We just make them fight one another. Mm-hmm. Well, what about me? Why can't you feed the kid? I need to go train. Why can't you go to the grocery store by yourself? I need to go train. Why can't we make them fight instead of trying to work around? And so I said, even though you didn't have that grieving process, a big part of why you probably didn't have it is because of those 2 lessons you just taught us. Get a perspective that where you're going is greater than where you've been. What's before you is going to give you a greater opportunity. And when you want to keep that thing in your life, be very creative with it. Be very creative. Let's talk about before we
can I just say you made that sound very good. You made that sound very good. I appreciate that.
Listen, I'm just regurgitating what you said. I'm just sitting on this and learning. That's all that's happening. That's all that's happening. Before we get to the part where you became empty nesters, you said something that was very important. And I learned this the hard way. My wife said to me one time, Darren, if I was not married to you and you did not value our marriage, I think you would be a workaholic. One of the hardest things for me as a person that loves the work, that gets buried in the work, sometimes may even hide in the work, is being present. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that you were able to master, now listen, you have the job where you were able to be present, but you also picked that job and stayed at that job. Mm-hmm. Talk about how important presence was as the man of your house, that your family wasn't distracted by work, They weren't distracted by everything. When you were home, you were home. How important is it for us as husbands to have presence in our home, to be present and not distracted?
I think that's probably one of the most important things, is to be there. And I'll try to share a couple of things. At the time when my children were very young, I had a job that was here in the city, and I was able to be more present, if you will, early on. My job situation changed. I took another job, and now I've got a 2-hour commute. So 4 hours of my day was spent just in driving. And for the next 20 plus years, Cherie was doing the majority of the stuff in the home, because I was either coming home late or leaving early. So I was missing some things. But what I did intentionally was, when I was home, I didn't allow other things to take me away.
Yeah.
I tried to, whether it was on Saturday going to dance classes or, karate or whatever, I was there. I was one of those dance dads, But that is something that we as husbands, and not only just for our children, but for our wives as well. If for instance, your wife's love language, my wife's love language is quality time. Now, it's hard if I'm putting 20 hours a week on the road and, we're not having that time. So when I'm home, or when we have the time, that time is dedicated to her. I've like I said, I've had the job where I've never had to really bring a lot of work home. Every now and then I might do something, but I'll do it late at night, or I'll do it at a point where, we've done what we needed to do or wanted to do, and then I'll do what I need to do for work. So I've always tried not to let work interfere. And then I had a coworker early on, when my kids were young, say to me, you got to tell kiddies that, and he didn't have kids, that daddy can't be at everything. And at first I was like, yeah, because work, I got to be at work, and I'm, we're part of a team. And then I read a devotional about how men look back, after they're divorced, or their kids are gone, or they're estranged from their kids, because they were so busy climbing the corporate ladder that they never put the time in for their family. And I remember after that, I was like, you know what? No, bump that. I'm going to be, unless they are, and even if they're threatening to fire me, I might have to say, well, hey, fire me, because, I'm not missing this. I'm going to be there. And, and the same thing. And sometimes, I didn't do it as much for Cherie at times, because, I knew, okay, if it's just this doctor's appointment, you can go, I'll get the next one, or something like that. But, we have to be more intentional in being there for them and showing them that we care about what's going on in their lives. And sometimes I didn't always do that. I miss some of those things,
It's amazing when you were talking about this idea of climbing the corporate ladder. I realized when you were talking about that, Matthew 4, the temptation of Jesus popped into my head, when Satan takes him to the top and lets him see everything. And I maybe saw it before, but just realized now that the number one thing that Jesus would have sacrificed if he fell for that temptation was a relationship. It would have been the relationship with God, his Father. That would have been the number one thing. And so when we are worried about what we can get rather than what we already have, and if what we already have is people that are looking for us to be there, if we continuously try to climb, that number one thing that's going to be sacrificed are the relationships, are the relationships. And go ahead, you go.
I was just going to say, to that point, I have told people, I feel like I am one of the richest men in the world, for what I have in my wife and in my children, from our family dynamic. I would not want to sacrifice that for any position, any amount of money, because you can't buy this. Just like you can't buy salvation, you can't buy family. Yeah, can I have money and we can go do trips and all that? But if you're not loving your wife or loving your children, and they don't want to be with you, but they'll just go because you want to take them to an island. Well, what do you have? So that investment that we made 40 years ago is what's paying off now.
Yeah. Contentment is one of the things that I am hearing, because some of the men that are listening, they know that their family is valuable, but there's something that is broken inside of them, or something that they feel as though is missing. I can speak from experience that I'm chasing this thing because it's not that I want the external thing, that's a result, but it feels like a part of me won't be whole until I get there. Let's talk about how important it is for men to work on, to address, to fix their insecurities or their improper longings before or even when they're leading our family. And I believe that that's why all men need to be in relationship with other men, especially older men. Mm-hmm. Because when, I don't care if you're 60 years old, right? There's 60-year-old men out there who are still climbing the corporate ladder. There's 60-year-old men out there that are still trying to redeem the time they got bullied in the lunchroom in the third grade. And they're trying to become king of the hill for that reason. Tell us how important it is for us as men to work on those insecurities, to work on those things that we might be getting wrong, to have other men look into our life and tell us, hey, you need to check that, or you need to, how important is that?
Again, very important. And I think, if I put on my counseling hat for just a second, I think you would have to ask the question, and you kind of talked about them, what is the root cause? So what was that traumatic event in that person's life that is causing them to still act this way 60 years later? So once they identify whatever that root cause is, now you can start to treat whatever it is. Like I said, I think it's very important that we understand who we are and whose we are. And once I understand that, then and let me back up. I think sometimes we end up paying too much attention to what society is telling us how we should be or what we should be doing, and not paying attention to what the biblical principles are of, one, the covenant relationship that you entered into. And, if I'm so caught up in what society says I have to have in terms of a house, a job, and this and that, then I've sacrificed my marriage, my relationship. And that's not the right sacrifice I need to be making. I need to be making the sacrifice the other way. I need to be giving up those things in order to build up my wife and the relationship that I have with her. Yeah. If that answers the question, I think.
That answers the question beautifully. Let's go now to the empty nester. When you and your wife became empty nesters. That is one of the biggest identity crises of crises of marriage that I hear about. When people who have raised children have children that leave the home, and they were teammates for so long raising these children, and these children were a big part of their marriage, and then they just disappear, like they're just gone. And now you're there with one another. And in some instance, I haven't been through it yet, but I've talked to a lot of older men that have. You got to get to know one another again. You have to get used to spending time with just you two. There's nothing to take you away from there. You're just with one another. Mm-hmm. How did you and your wife work through that? Was there an identity crisis? Was there a relational crisis? What was it, and how did you work through it?
Well, as I said, Cherie did start to tell me. I didn't pay attention. So yes, there probably was a little relational crisis in there, because I was so focused in all of our conversation, all of our dealings centered around the kids, and we forgot about putting in time in for us. So when they were gone, like I said, when one thing's gone, you got to replace it with something else. Well, unfortunately, we didn't initially replace it with have anything to replace it with. We were just sitting there. We'd be at dinner. We'd be sitting there looking at each other like, what do you want to talk about? What do you want to talk about? And we just didn't have it. So, it for a number of years, it was kind of difficult. And, we probably sunk into other things. I was in school or ministry, and she was, volunteering. So we probably went into those things a little bit more heavier than actually working on us. And we're still probably feeling some of the effects of that even now. We do try to attend marriage seminars or marriage retreats. Again, that's an investment. Try to find books on marriage. And one of the things, and you kind of mentioned about having other men around, we've tried to involve ourselves with other married couples, fellowshipping, traveling, having, an older couple that we can talk to and look at and look toward, having a couple that's around our age, and then a younger couple that's coming up that we can walk with. So those things are helping us to rebuild, to recharge. And I believe you said it, about being intentional. We have to be intentional about what we're doing and how we're doing it. And I'll say for me, have I kind of, just gone, just kind of been there and not been as intentional. But now, that we are in that mode, I do have to pay more attention. I do have to be more intentional about the things that I do with or for Cherie. We like to travel, can we do more traveling? Can we just, she say, hey, we need to take more weekend trips. Can we once a quarter, just go away, just us, so those are things that, yes, I need to follow up on and make sure that they happen. Sometimes our wives will be telling us, they'll give us the roadmap. We just got to be willing to go down that roadmap.
That's right. That's right. You said something that was very vulnerable, I believe. You said it was the point in your marriage when the kids left, and it happened for some years. So this would be a two-part question where you were trying to figure it out, but you just didn't have it. Mm-hmm. It just wasn't there. You didn't have the language. You didn't have the tools. You didn't have the capability. Talk about what made you fight for a better tomorrow when you were living in that today of, we just don't have it. And you said this lasted years. So there are people out there who are in a, 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, and they're thinking about giving up. But this problem may go on for a few years where you just don't have it. How did you work through that?
Well, again, putting on a counselor's hat, both of us being counselors, we can tell others how to do things. And one of the things that we've both discovered from a counseling perspective and even from a preaching and teaching perspective, the lessons that we as a Sunday school teacher that I would go through, or sermons that I would preach, or cases that we would get, we would always have to ask the question, what does God want me to get out of this?
Hmm.
And a lot of our cases, like I do a lot of premarital cases and marital cases. Sheree has a little bit different other bent, but the thing that she would always ask is, what does God want us to get out of that? And when I would look at some of these cases, particularly marriages that were struggling or whatnot, I could sometimes see a direct correlation to, okay, we're doing that too, or we're dealing with that too.
Wow.
So, just kind of walking through those things, seeing those things, putting those things back into practice,
Hmm.
because like we said, it is work, and it's not an easy work. And I think, we talked before, and I said, marriage is not for the faint of heart. And that's
That's
what I
right.
was talking about, that fear, not a fear like you go to a horror movie, but a fear of, man, what am I getting ready to get into? you know
Hmm.
and so putting that work in, understanding that covenant, understanding those vows, for richer, for poor, for better, for worse, and sickness and health. you know we're dealing with all of that. We've had to go through all of that. you
Yeah.
know and understanding that it's a covenant relationship, and I don't want to break that covenant with God and my wife, because it's three.
Hmm.
And that's what I think has helped us to fight, uh, to be willing to put in the work. Um, there were times when people would say, "Oh man, we want a marriage like yours. We want to be like you." And at first, we were kind of like, oh, okay, yeah. And then I'm thinking, like, no, you don't want, because you don't know what we had to go through. You know,
Hmm.
you want to look at our marriage or other marriages. You want to take pieces of it, and that's what we've done. We've looked at other people and saw what they've done, and we've incorporated that in ours. And not that we've taken on their whole thing, but hey, I see a man, how he talks to his wife, how he holds her hand, maybe, or how he makes sure that they go out on a regular basis. So yeah, I take that. you know One of the things, hey, work smarter, not harder.
Yeah.
It's okay to steal a little bit and incorporate it in yours. And that's what we've
Yeah.
done.
I one of the messages I hope that you just drove home for people. One of the biggest lies of American society is this idea of individualism.
Hmm.
Be your own person, do your own this, do your own boom, boom, boom. And we don't realize how much we can learn from others who are around us to make our thing better. And society has gotten to a point, like you said, we don't pay attention to society. We pay attention to the biblical, to the scriptures, the biblical narrative. This is why community was always so important. And because they were learning from one another, they were watching one another, they were holding one another accountable. They were able to glean things from people who were their age, who were older, who may even be younger, who do some of these things really well. And that's why we also need to be in community with other married couples. But when we're in community and other married couples, we can learn from their relationship, but not covet their relationship. Like you
Mm-hmm.
said, we
Mm-hmm.
don't want to covet, because our relationship can't be their relationship, because their relationship has two different people in it than our
Yes.
relationship, right?
Mm-hmm.
We need to be
Mm-hmm.
who we are destined to be. A young man walks up to you right now. We only have a few minutes left. And he says to you, Ken, I want to get married. I'm thinking about marrying the girl that I'm with, but I just need you to give me a list of what I need to be prepared for. Don't make it too long, because we don't have, he's saying to you, don't make it too long, Ken, because we don't have all day. And you'll probably say to him, young whippersnapper, sit your behind down. You got all your life, right? But what are some of the big themes that you would give him, and how he needs to prepare himself for the covenant before God, and also as the leader of his wife?
That's a deep question. I hadn't really thought about this before, but once you said that, and we started talking about the covenant in premarital counseling, at the end, we do kind of go over that covenant, and I would really walk with him or make sure he understands what that means, that covenant. Not to enter into it lightly, but reverently. To understand that it's not going to be, what you're experiencing, as you're dating or now, that's not the way it's going to be all the time. It's not going to be fun and games all the time. It's going to be some hard stuff. So to understand what it is, the vows that you're about to take, the covenant that you're going to enter, and it's not just the covenant with your wife, but it's the covenant with God or before God, to make sure that he has, because if you think like we didn't have a wedding, we eloped. So I didn't have, like a bachelor party and all. But if you've got these guys around, make sure you've got some guys that are married, that have been there and done that you can lean on. Not just your boys. Who was it? The ruler in the Bible, his father passed and he had his father's counselors, but he decided to go to his boys, and his boys, told him, yeah, put more work on them. No, you don't want those kind of counselors. You want counselors that have been there. And one of the things as we've talked, and I've kind of thought about, it makes sense to talk to somebody who's been doing this for a while. You think about business, you think about sports. What do business people do? They don't go out and try to recreate the wheel. No, they're talking to other people who's already done this, who are already successful at it, and then they try to incorporate those things that person is doing. Same way with sports. You think about sports, football. Coaches. You get Bill Belichick. He's probably considered one of the most successful coaches in the NFL. Every coach that comes from him, they incorporate stuff from what he's done. Now, nobody's been able to duplicate what he's done, because you can't do what he's done because you don't have the team and the players that he has. But you can take bits and pieces and make it fit for your team. And that's the same thing that I would tell a young man, is look at somebody else who's already married, who's been walking and been doing this, has a good marriage. Don't go to somebody, they're always fighting and, he's out doing one thing and she's doing, but find a good marriage and talk to them as well. Study your wife, understand her love language, because it's nothing worse than, always wanting to bring your wife a gift and she likes words of affirmation and she don't like your gift, or she wants quality time and you're always trying to do acts of service, So study your wife and if anything else, learn to be sacrificial, learn to give up. You got to be willing to give up. It's not about you, because it's about the two becoming one. So you had talked about that individuality. No, you are two. You mentioned a team, that's what I would probably talk about to him.
Yeah. All right. Last question. I mean, what you just talked about was wonderful. I think if I could go back and tell my younger self something before I would get married, I would tell myself, don't get married. Don't rush to get married because you're in a hurry to be a man. Rush to be a man because you need to prepare yourself for marriage.
Okay. That's good.
And I think and the tension in there is a lot of young men are picking up the idea of marriage or the institution because they see it as a part of manhood. And rightfully so. It is a part of manhood, but it's only for the men who are really prepared. Right. Who have sought out the wisdom, because none of us will be prepared all the way through. It's for those who, when they signed up, vetted themselves to see if they were going to tap out, right? Like I tell my wife this story all the time. I was just like, listen, I had my time in the streets and I had the privilege to see the streets from in front of the wall and behind the wall. And when I start seeing cats getting sentenced to 20 plus years, and I was like, nah, I'm not going to make it. Like, I'm not cut for this cloth, right? And I think that that's what some of us as men need to say. I'm not ready yet because I'm still asking these questions. I still have this reservation. If you're saying, I think she might be the one, then I need you to calm on down, buddy, right? I need you to turn that think into something more definite, more sure, more led by prayer instead of your emotion. But I think that all that you said just sparked that thought. Last question.
Yes, sir.
If you can spread a message around the world about marriage, they give you the world's speakerphone. They let you make an address. You fly the Goodyear blimp around the world with a message on it about marriage. It can be a warning. It could be an encouragement. It can be anything. What's your message?
Well, you broke up a little bit, but I think what you're asking is if I had a message to give that I would spread around the world, what would it be? I don't know why this keeps popping into my mind, but do not enter into this lightly. I think, what you said about, a man needing to prepare to be a man, and just because you get married doesn't make you a man. I think that praying and not entering into this lightly. And I know that's not a coherent sentence or phrase, but I don't know why that just keeps popping into my mind is not to enter into marriage lightly, but reverently, and to reverence God in your marriage and make sure that he is the head of your marriage.
Man, that's good. So sobering. This episode was just very sobering, and it needed to be that because it's going to give us a lot of perspective. We've talked about the roller coaster ride of marriage. That's what you've taken us through. We thank you so much for joining us,
Yes,
Ken, on this episode of Husbandry. Do you have any closing words before we sign off?
No, I just thank you for just the opportunity to share. And, I think you and I have talked before about men needing this, trying to get together in groups or settings, because, one of the things, I think men want to be able to ask questions. And I think, they want to be able to see, and measure halo data when somebody's telling you. I don't want them to just feel like I'm just telling you, you just should be telling you. I want you to be able to see the emotion from me and the feeling from me. So I think having these, meetings or get-togethers where we can bring men together, married men together to have discussions, I would love to see something like that and be a part of something like that.
Yeah, I hope we can do that because, one of the things that I've been telling people is, one of the reasons why I've done this podcast is because I realized that I was privileged, right? I was a privileged Black man. And the reason why I considered myself to be privileged in this instance is because I can pick up my cell phone and I can just throw a rock and hit 5 to 7 men without even thinking about it that have been married 20 plus years. And there are a lot of young men out here, especially Black men, who don't know anybody around them that has had a successful marriage, right? And they have a lot of broken relationships around them and they want to do it the right way. But they're just like, where do I get this guidance from? Where do I get this help from? And I felt it to be I feel like when you have privilege, you should share it. And that was one of the biggest things for me, that I can just scroll in my phone 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 36 years. I mean, just between you and Dave Barnes, that's 76 years of marriage. Right, like I know I'm making, I know it burns, but Lord, thank God for you, But so all that to say, thank you for sharing, thank you for being available, thank you for having these
Amen.
conversations. I
Yes, sir.
hope to have plenty more with you and us to have more with
Yes.
a group of men. And brother, God bless you, and I hope and I pray for you another 40 more years. And once again,
Thank
thank
you,
you so
sir.
much. All right. We'll see you next
Thank
episode
you.
of
Thank you.
Husbandry.